Have you ever noticed how the loudest sound in a relationship is not an argument, but the sudden, heavy arrival of silence? Most people do not realize that the deepest heartbreak often does not come from a single dramatic moment of departure. It comes slowly. It comes quietly. It happens on an ordinary evening, sitting in the exact same room, when you suddenly realize the person you love is sharing less and less with you. You ask a simple question, and the answer is unusually short. You look for a moment of connection, and instead, you meet an invisible wall. The comfortable, warm quiet you once shared has been replaced by a heavy, suffocating distance. If you have ever felt stuck, anxious, exhausted, or invisible because someone you love is emotionally retreating, this is for you. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you see this pain forever. When emotional distance begins to grow, the natural human reaction is absolute panic. The mind instantly goes to war against the silence. You begin to overthink everything. You replay past conversations in the dark. You analyze their tone of voice, the time it takes them to reply to a simple message, the subtle way they look away when you speak. You carry around a heavy, growing mountain of unanswered questions. Why are they pulling away? Did I do something wrong? Are they falling out of love? Here is the truth few people want to face. Most of your suffering is not caused by the silence itself. It is caused by how frantically you are trying to force the silence to speak. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering arises directly from our resistance to reality. The universe operates on the universal law of impermanence. Everything is in motion. Everything changes. Seasons shift. Rivers carve new paths into the earth. And human hearts, even the ones closest to us, experience entirely unpredictable tides of closeness and distance. But instead of accepting the retreating tide, we fight it. We demand absolute certainty. We try to force a confession, an explanation, a permanent return to the way things were. Think about your own life. Have you noticed that the harder you try to pull them back, the further peace moves away? You interrogate them softly. You walk on eggshells to avoid pushing them further. You completely exhaust your own spirit, trying to solve a puzzle where the other person has quietly pocketed the pieces. You are pouring all your remaining energy into a space where nothing is being offered in return. Imagine holding tightly to a thick rope that is attached to a boat slowly drifting out into rough water. The current is incredibly strong. The tide is pulling the heavy boat away from the shore, desperate to keep it close. You pull back with all your strength. The friction burns your skin. Your hands begin to bleed. Your muscles ache with a deep, consuming exhaustion. But the boat continues to drift. The deepest pain in your hands is not caused by the boat leaving. It is caused by your refusal to let go of the rope. Ask yourself, what are you still holding on to? Are you holding on to the person who is actually sitting in front of you today, or are you clinging desperately to a ghost of who they used to be? Is this frantic cycle of questioning bringing you closer to the truth, or is it simply feeding your fear? Pause, breathe. Observe the heavy, anxious feeling in your chest without following it down the spiral. Let the feeling rise without making it your entire identity. You do not have to chase what is already turning away. You do not have to collapse inside just because someone else has quietly closed a door. There is a profound, unshakable freedom in looking directly at an unanswered question, feeling the sharp sting of it, and actively choosing to let it remain unanswered. But letting go of the desperate need for an explanation is only the first step, and this is where the next truth begins. 2. The illusion of forcing an answer. What if the very act of demanding the truth is what makes it impossible to receive? Here is the truth few people want to face. When the person you love becomes quiet, your instinct is to break the silence. You believe that if you just ask the right question or use the perfect tone of voice, you can unlock whatever is keeping them closed off. You sit on the edge of the bed and ask, "What are you thinking?" only to receive a hollow, nothing in return. You type long, emotional messages, hoping to spark a connection. You treat their silence as a problem you must immediately solve. You believe that their withdrawal is an emergency, and that your love, your effort, or your sheer willpower can force them to open back up. But this is an illusion. Buddhist wisdom teaches that one of the greatest sources of our suffering is the illusion of control. We suffer deeply because we believe we can control the thoughts, feelings, and internal seasons of another human being. We become attached not just to the person, but to a very specific version of them, the version that is open, communicative, and warm. When they change, we resist. But Buddhism reminds us that true peace comes from non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean you do not care. It means you love them, but you stop trying to control their emotional weather. Imagine standing at the edge of a small pond filled with muddy water. You want to see the stones at the bottom, so you reach your hands in and desperately try to push the dirt down. You stir the water over and over, trying to force it to be clear, but the more you fight it, the more clouded it becomes. The water cannot be forced into clarity by your frantic motion. It is only when you step back, pull your hands away, and allow the water to sit in absolute stillness that the mud slowly settles on its own. The silence of someone you love is exactly like that muddy water. You cannot force them to be clear with you by constantly stirring the space between you. Think about your own life. When you try to drag an explanation out of someone who is not ready or willing to give it, what actually happens? They retreat further, they feel pressured, and you are left feeling completely drained, begging for crumbs of validation. You are looking to them to soothe the anxiety that their silence created. You are handing them the keys to your inner peace, waiting for them to speak so that you can finally exhale. Ask yourself this: are you desperately seeking an answer because you need clarity, or are you seeking an answer because you cannot tolerate the discomfort of the unknown? What are you afraid will happen if you simply let the question hang in the empty air? Pause, breathe. Stop trying to force the door open. Let them be silent. You do not need to pry the truth from their hands. You can simply allow them to have their own private struggle, their own distance, without making it your responsibility to fix. Let the unanswered question remain unanswered. Because peace is not found in dragging an answer out of someone. But when you finally stop interrogating the silence, your frantic mind will attempt to fill the void on its own. And this is where the next truth begins. 3. The suffering of the imagined story. What if the most painful words in your relationship are the ones that were never actually spoken? Here is the truth few people want to face. The human mind is terrified of emptiness. When the person you love becomes distant and leaves your questions hanging in the air, your mind panics. It cannot tolerate a void, so it immediately begins to write a script to fill the quiet. You begin to tell yourself agonizing stories. You sit in the living room while they stare at their phone, and you think, they are planning to leave me. You notice their brief replies, and your mind whispers, I am no longer enough for them. You replay a completely ordinary conversation from 3 days ago, searching for the exact moment you ruined everything. You construct tragic, heartbreaking endings out of thin air, and you grieve for losses that have not even happened. You completely exhaust yourself fighting phantoms. Buddhist wisdom teaches that much of our agony comes from the mind's endless projections. In Buddhist thought, there is a teaching about the 2 arrows. When life delivers a difficult moment, such as a partner pulling away, that is the first arrow. It causes genuine pain. But the second arrow is the story we tell ourselves about the pain. It is the self-blame, the catastrophic future we build in our heads, the belief that we are unlovable. We do not have control over the first arrow, but we are the ones shooting the second arrow directly into our own hearts. Imagine sitting alone in a dim, quiet room. In the corner, a single shadow stretches across the wall. To a frantic, anxious mind, that shadow looks like a terrifying monster, a looming disaster waiting to strike. You cower in the center of the room, your heart races, you are convinced you are about to be destroyed. But the shadow is just a shadow. It is not a monster. It is simply a trick of the light, a shape cast by a small candle in the darkness. The fear you feel in your chest is entirely real, but the monster is an illusion. When you lie awake at 2 in the morning, agonizing over what their silence means, you are fighting shadows in the dark. You are reacting to an imagined disaster. You are breaking your own heart based on an assumption, a fear, a heavy narrative that your mind invented to feel a false sense of control. You believe that if you can predict the worst possible outcome, it will hurt less when it arrives. But you are only guaranteeing your own suffering in the present moment. Ask yourself, how many times have you suffered deeply over a story your mind invented? Is this thought bringing you peace or feeding your fear? Are you reacting to the reality of the person sitting across from you or the terrifying ghost you have attached to them? Pause, breathe, observe the thought without following it. Watch the tragic story begin to form in your mind and gently refuse to believe it. You do not have to accept every terrifying thought your mind offers you. Let the heavy feeling rise without making it your reality. Anchor yourself strictly to what is true right now. They are quiet. That is all. Because peace is not found in predicting the storm before it arrives. It is found in realizing that you do not need to drown in rain that has not yet fallen. But realizing the story is an illusion is only part of the journey. To truly find rest, you must change your relationship with the unknown. And this is where the next truth begins. 4. The wisdom of the unanswered question. What if the silence is not an enemy you must defeat, but a deep, quiet space you must learn to inhabit? Here is the truth few people want to face. We have been conditioned to believe that every emotional question deserves an immediate answer. When someone you love stops sharing their inner world with you, it feels as though they have left a heavy sentence entirely unfinished. You feel as if you are left standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for their final word so you can finally step back onto solid ground. You believe that without their explanation, without their reassurance, or without their reasoning, you simply cannot move forward. You hold your breath, convinced that your internal peace is entirely dependent on them speaking. But this is a quiet, invisible trap. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the deepest peace is found not in resolving every uncertainty, but in learning to rest comfortably inside the unknown. In Buddhist thought, suffering is closely tied to our desperate need to categorize, explain, and resolve every single shifting aspect of our lives. When we fiercely demand an answer, we are still clinging tightly to the other person. We are still demanding that they organize our reality for us. But Buddhism reminds us that true liberation arrives when we stop demanding that the world explain itself before we allow ourselves to feel calm. Imagine standing in a long, quiet hallway facing a heavy, locked door. You know the person you love has retreated behind it. Desperate to know what they are thinking, you rattle the iron handle, you knock softly, and then you begin to pound your fists against the solid wood until your knuckles ache. You press your ear against the cold surface, straining to hear even the faintest whisper. You exhaust all of your energy trying to force the lock, believing that your entire life, your worth, and your peace are trapped on the other side of that wood. But the door remains locked. The profound tragedy is not that the door is closed. The tragedy is that while you are staring endlessly at a locked door, you have completely turned your back on the wide, open, breathable space behind you. You have forgotten your own legs, You have forgotten that you have the power to simply turn around. Think about your own life. Think about the nights spent staring at a glowing screen, waiting for a message that never arrives. Think about the emotional energy wasted trying to decode a brief, distant glance. You are standing at the locked door of their mind, demanding entry. You are handing them complete authority over your emotional state, deciding that you cannot be okay until they give you the missing piece of the puzzle. Ask yourself, what are you afraid will happen if you simply let the door stay locked? What if the quiet lack of an answer is, in itself, the only answer you will ever need? Pause, breathe, stop trying to force the door open. Let the heavy question exist in the empty air without reaching out to grab it. You do not need to pull an answer from someone who is choosing to keep their hands closed. You can simply let the unanswered question remain entirely unanswered and quietly realize that you are still breathing, because true peace is not a final explanation handed to you by someone else. It is the quiet, powerful acceptance that some mysteries are simply not yours to solve. But to release the need for an answer, you must first look at why their silence makes you feel so small. And this is where the next truth begins. 5. Detaching your worth from their distance. What if their sudden silence has absolutely nothing to do with your value as a human being? Here is the truth few people want to face. When the person you love shares less and less with you, the deepest wound is not the loss of conversation. The deepest wound is what you tell yourself that loss means. When they look away, your mind whispers that you are entirely unlovable. When they offer a brief, emotionless answer to a tender question, you instantly believe that you are not enough. You begin to shrink. You analyze your own behavior, your own words, and your own appearance, desperately searching for the flaw that caused them to close the door. You have completely tied your internal sense of worth to their external mood. You measure your value by how much attention, warmth, and validation they are willing to pour into your hands on any given day. Buddhist wisdom teaches that a massive source of our daily agony comes from personalizing the shifting, impermanent world. In Buddhist thought, the ego desperately wants to be the center of everything. When a partner pulls away, the ego insists it is our fault. We believe their emotional withdrawal is a direct reflection of our inadequacy. But one of the deepest lessons of Buddhism is the understanding that the actions, moods, and emotional seasons of others belong entirely to them. Their silence is their own weather. It is not a permanent judgment on your soul. Imagine a vast open sky on a quiet afternoon. The sky is perfectly clear, holding the gentle warmth of the sun. Slowly, a massive, dark bank of clouds rolls in from the horizon. The clouds are heavy, silent, and thick. They completely obscure the light. But ask yourself this: does the sky panic? Does the sky believe it has somehow failed because the clouds have arrived? Does the empty blue expanse shrink or question its own existence just because a heavy storm is passing through? No, the sky simply remains. It holds the clouds without becoming the clouds. It knows that the dark weather belongs to the wind, not to the sky itself. When you sit across the table from a partner who is staring silently at their plate, you are the sky, and their distance is the heavy cloud. But you have forgotten your own vastness. You have decided that because they are wrapped in a dark, quiet storm, you must be a failure. You twist yourself into knots, desperately trying to blow the clouds away so you can feel worthy of the sun again. You forget that their inability to connect right now is a reflection of their own internal struggle, their own exhaustion, or their own fears. It is their weather. It is not your failing. Think about your own life. How much of your self-respect have you handed over to someone else's silence? Why do you believe that their inability to speak diminishes your right to exist peacefully? Ask yourself, what if they are simply entirely lost in their own dark woods, and their quiet has nothing to do with how beautifully you love them? Pause, breathe, Let the feeling of rejection rise without making it your identity. You do not have to absorb their emotional withdrawal into your own heart. Stop measuring your worth by the length of their replies. Allow them to have their own silent weather without letting it dictate your internal climate. Because peace is not found in convincing someone else to validate your worth. It is found when you realize your worth was never actually at risk. But separating your worth from their silence reveals an even deeper rhythm to the relationship. And this is where the next truth begins. 6. The metaphor of the retreating tide. What if the distance between you and the person you love is not a permanent departure, but simply the natural breathing of the world? Here is the truth few people want to face. When we love deeply, we expect absolute consistency. We want the connection to remain at a constant high tide. We want the warmth, the deep conversations, and the closeness to be available every single day. When the person we love suddenly pulls back and their energy recedes, we panic. We view their need for space as an absolute betrayal. We believe that if they are not actively moving toward us, they must be permanently abandoning us. So, we sprint after them. We try to close the gap. We exhaust ourselves trying to bridge a distance that was never meant to be a threat. Buddhist wisdom teaches the profound truth of natural rhythms. Everything in the universe exists in a state of flux, expanding and contracting. In Buddhism, the refusal to accept these natural cycles is a primary source of our suffering. We want the flower to stay in bloom forever, forgetting that the petals must fall for the roots to rest. We want human connection to be a solid, unchanging monument. But human hearts are not monuments. They are living, breathing ecosystems, subject to seasons of quiet and seasons of retreat. Imagine standing on the shoreline at the edge of the ocean. The water is at high tide, washing warmly over your feet. It feels safe. It feels beautiful. It feels constant. But eventually, the earth turns, the moon shifts, and the tide begins to roll back out to sea. The wet sand is exposed. The water recedes further and further away from you. Terrified that the ocean is leaving you forever, you drop to your knees. You dig your fingers into the wet sand. You try to cup the retreating water in your bare hands, desperately trying to pull it back to the shore. You weep as the water slips through your clenched fingers. But the ocean is not abandoning the shore. It is simply following the law of the tide. It must recede before it can return. When you panic over a partner who has grown quiet, you are crying over the retreating tide. You are frantically trying to hold the ocean in your hands. You believe that their need to pull back is a permanent loss, rather than a natural, necessary contraction of their own spirit. You forget that true closeness requires the space to breathe. By chasing them, by constantly demanding that they return to the shore before they are ready, you are only disrupting the natural rhythm. Think about your own life. How often do you suffocate a connection because you are terrified of the space between you? You send another message. You ask another question. You force a conversation just to hear their voice, completely ignoring the fact that they are emotionally drained. You are demanding high tide from a person who currently has nothing left to give. Ask yourself, are you allowing the people you love the freedom to retreat, or do you demand they stay at high tide forever? What if their silence is not a punishment, but simply the deep, quiet exhalation of an exhausted mind? Pause. Breathe. Do your part, then release the outcome. Watch the water pull away and gently refuse to chase it. Stand firmly on the shore. Let the tide recede. You do not need to plunge into the deep, rough water to drag them back. Because peace is not found in forcing the ocean to remain at your feet. It is found in trusting the rhythm of the water. But to stand peacefully on the empty shore, you must learn how to quiet your own frantic movements. And this is where the next truth begins. 7. The practice of radical stillness. What if doing absolutely nothing is the most powerful response you can possibly offer? Here is the truth few people want to face. We are obsessed with effort. We have been taught that if a relationship is hurting, we must actively fix it. We must work, dig, talk, and resolve. When the person you love goes quiet, the anxiety in your chest acts like a harsh, ringing alarm. It screams at you to do something, so you hover. You ask them if they need anything. You try to create small, forced moments of intimacy. You become a frantic manager of their emotional state, constantly buzzing around their silence, desperately hoping your desperate motion will somehow wake them up. Buddhist wisdom teaches the profound power of the pause. In Buddhism, the highest form of mastery is not forcing the world to bend to your will, but mastering your own reaction to it. Mindfulness is the practice of observing the desperate urge to act, the deep itch to fix the silence, and gently refusing to follow it. It is the realization that stillness is not a passive surrender. Radical stillness is an incredibly active, powerful choice. It takes immense internal strength to sit beside a quiet partner, feel the heavy weight of an unanswered question, and consciously choose not to fill the empty space. Imagine a heavy stone being dropped into a perfectly clear, quiet pool of water. The sharp impact creates chaotic, rapidly expanding ripples. The water is deeply disturbed. If your ultimate goal is to make the water perfectly still again, what is the worst thing you could possibly do? The worst thing you could do is plunge your hands into the pool and try to physically flatten the ripples. Your frantic hands will only create more chaos, more waves, and more disturbance. The only way the water will ever return to a state of pure calm is if you pull your hands back, sit quietly on the edge of the bank, and do absolutely nothing. The water knows how to settle itself. Think about your own life. Every time you send that extra text message to check their mood, every time you forcefully and cheerfully ask what is wrong, trying to spark a fire that is currently burnt out, you are plunging your hands into the water. You are creating more waves because you cannot tolerate the current ripples. You are refusing to let the moment simply be awkward, quiet, or distant. You are exhausting yourself trying to manufacture a peace that can only happen naturally. Ask yourself, can you sit in the exact same room with the person you love while they are completely silent, without feeling the overwhelming, burning urge to fix them? Can you let the space between you be entirely empty without immediately assuming the emptiness is a threat? Pause, breathe, observe the frantic urge to manage their mood, and gently let it pass. Stop trying to flatten the ripples. You do not need to be the constant emotional caretaker of the room. Let the silence sit heavy. You do not have to carry it. You can simply exist in your own physical space, letting their unanswered questions remain completely unanswered without collapsing inside. Because true peace is not found in constantly repairing the connection. It is found in having the quiet strength to simply let it rest. But when you finally stop focusing all your energy entirely on their silence, you are left with something even more confronting. And this is where the next truth begins. 8. Shifting the focus back inward. What if the silence of the person you love is actually a profound invitation to finally listen to yourself? Here is the truth few people want to face. You have spent so much time staring at them, waiting for a sign, that you have completely abandoned your own inner world. You have become a ghost haunting your own relationship. You gauge your hunger by whether they want to eat. You measure your peace by whether they are smiling. If they are distant, your entire day is ruined. Your focus has been a relentless laser beam pointed directly at their closed door. You have been pouring all of your vital emotional energy outward into a void, leaving your own spirit empty, cold, and entirely neglected. Buddhist wisdom teaches that true, unshakable refuge is only found within. When we cling to others for our emotional stability, we are building a heavy house on shifting sand. In Buddhist thought, when the external world becomes stormy, unreadable, or silent, the most vital practice is to immediately bring the awareness back to the self. We suffer deeply because we believe our peace lives inside the other person. We believe they hold the key. But Buddhism reminds us that the pain you feel in the face of their withdrawal is not just the absence of their voice. It is the painful, tragic abandonment of your own center. Imagine a beautiful, sturdy house with a large stone hearth in the very center. For a long time, you have carried every piece of dry firewood out the front door, desperately trying to keep a fire burning, in the freezing rain to keep someone else warm. You have worked tirelessly. Your hands are splintered, but the heavy rain keeps putting the fire out. And meanwhile, inside your own house, the hearth is entirely dark. The rooms are freezing. You are shivering on the porch, completely exhausted from fighting the weather outside, having completely forgotten that you have the power to step back inside, close the door, and light your own fire. When you sit on the edge of the bed, agonizing over their lack of communication, you are standing in the freezing rain. You are desperately trying to warm yourself by a fire they are currently refusing to build. You have completely forgotten that you have your own life, your own breath, your own quiet joys, and your own physical body that desperately needs your attention. You have abandoned yourself to sit in the waiting room of their life. Think about that. Think about how much of your day is spent waiting for them to validate your existence. You pause your own hobbies. You isolate yourself from friends because your mood is too low. You have paused your entire existence, waiting for them to press play. Ask yourself, what would happen if you took all the heavy, frantic, anxious energy you are directing at their silence and quietly poured it back into your own life? What if you decided that you are allowed to be okay, even if they are not? Pause, breathe, bring your attention back into your own physical body. Feel your feet resting firmly on the solid floor. Notice the steady, quiet rise and fall of your own chest. Stop abandoning yourself. You do not need their permission to feel warm. You do not need their voice to find your center. Because true peace is not found by staring endlessly at the person who is pulling away. It is found by turning around and finally coming home to yourself. But coming home to yourself leads to the final, most transformative realization of all. And this is where the final truth begins. 9. The quiet strength of letting be. What if the most profound act of love is simply allowing the space between you to exist exactly as it is? Here is the truth that brings everything together. We began this journey looking at the heavy, agonizing weight of a growing silence. We looked at the sudden, quiet realization that the person you love is sharing less and less with you. We explored the immediate panic, the frantic interrogation, the tragic stories your mind invents in the dark, and the sheer physical exhaustion of trying to force a locked door open. You have spent so much energy running from their silence, deeply convinced that if those massive unanswered questions are allowed to remain unanswered, you will simply collapse inside. But Buddhism reminds us of a deeper, quieter reality. Letting go is not the same thing as giving up. Letting go is the profound, courageous act of surrendering your frantic resistance to reality. It is the realization that peace is not achieved by forcing the world to give you absolute certainty or constant validation. True peace is achieved by creating a space inside yourself that is vast enough and steady enough to hold the uncertainty without breaking. It is the ultimate practice of non-attachment, loving someone deeply without needing to control how they express their love in return. Imagine a deeply rooted tree standing entirely alone as the seasons begin to change. In the late autumn, the air grows violently cold. The leaves begin to wither, turn brown, and fall quietly to the earth. Soon, the branches are left bare and entirely exposed to the freezing wind. But the tree does not panic. It does not twist its branches in a desperate, agonizing attempt to catch the falling leaves and force them back into place. It does not believe it has somehow failed just because the season has shifted into a quiet, cold winter. The tree simply draws its energy back down into its roots, stands tall in the absolute stillness, and trusts the quiet waiting. It lets the cold season be exactly what it is. When the person you love enters a quiet, distant winter, you do not need to panic. You do not need to catch the falling leaves. You can simply stand tall in your own roots. You can let them experience their own silence without twisting yourself into knots, trying to keep them warm. Think about the immense freedom waiting for you. On the other side of this release, you have carried the heavy weight of this connection for so long. You have meticulously monitored their moods, tracked their silences, and sacrificed your own inner peace just to decode their distance. What would happen if you simply stopped fighting? What if you looked at the empty, quiet space between you and finally whispered, "I do not understand this, but I do not need to fix it"? Ask yourself, can you finally lay down the heavy burden of being the one who always bridges the gap? Can you allow the unanswered questions to remain suspended in the empty air, trusting that you are completely whole, completely worthy, and completely safe, even if you never receive an explanation? Pause. Breathe. Let that sink in. You are not powerless. You are holding immense, quiet strength. You can sit in the exact same room with their silence and not be swallowed by it. You can love them deeply from a place of profound presence, rather than a place of frantic fear. You can gently detach your self-respect from their emotional weather. You can let the tide pull away, knowing you are standing firmly on the shore. Do your part, then quietly release the outcome, because peace was never an answer hidden behind a locked door. Peace is the unshakable trust you build within yourself when you finally stop trying to control what was never yours to hold. If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. You can let go now.